Okay, this is my Drive to Survive recap video. Full disclosure, I watched all of the episodes back to back on Friday and Saturday. I have extensive notes, but then I procrastinated filming this video, so I don't really remember what I wrote, and we're gonna recap it together. We're gonna go through, we're gonna learn. Starting with episode 1, my first note is who gets the top at Ferrari, BFFR, Will Buxton. They did kind of, and they immediately resolved it by being like, Carlos Sainz needs a seat, but they had just signed Charles to a 5-year contract, so it's a little bit silly. But the part about Carlos getting fired, I always have sympathy. Like, obviously, people are gonna be like, you're such a Carlos hater. I'm not even really a hater, but obviously I'm rooting for Charles, you know what I mean? And everything that went down with Bonota, we're not gonna get into it. But anytime you have to watch someone get fired, like, I'm always a little bit like, damn. Like, it is really sad. I felt for him in that moment. The photo shoot of all of them before the season on those blocks, the reactions were hilarious. Fernando was killing me the whole scene. I had to stop and post a TikTok about it because it was so funny. Then we have the Carlos to Williams Alpine team musical chairs moment. Checo saying it's like flirting was killing me. Carlos talking to Lewis about Toto calling him was very interesting. They have a little scene from in there. It's not 100% clear where and when it was filmed, but Carlos is saying that he doesn't think Mercedes is interested because Toto would have called him if so. Toto and Fred being besties, that little subplot moment was very interesting. I always love the story of Fred eating the centerpiece at Toto's wedding because he thought it was edible and it was not. The team principal dynamics are very fascinating to me. Obviously, we've always had Toto and Horner. And now that Horner is a creep, which we'll get onto later in this episode, it's kind of ruined for me because he used to be a fun villain and now I'm like, oh, you're like actually need to not be in your job anymore. But I always found them hilarious, and the Toto Fred being besties and Toto being like, he didn't answer my text and I knew. It was just a good insight. I liked seeing that. Never forget when Toto Wolff is like, I make everyone at Mercedes have a photo of their counterpart at Red Bull in the garage to like visualize your enemy or something ridiculous. And I'm like, so you have like, what photo of Christian Horner did he choose? Still waiting on the answer to that one. In terms of the Horner sexual harassment allegations, I do think they handled it pretty well. I'm honestly impressed that they included it. I felt like Netflix was gonna glaze right over that one. And the fact that they also covered the leak was kind of crazy to me. And while they do keep it fairly neutral, I think choosing to include all of the PR and comms Red Bull people's conversations with both Netflix and Horner was very telling. I think them leaving in when he was like, save me, to the Red Bull PR people as like a joke. Also, the clip of Zach Brown, a lot of people are like, well, he's only saying that because like Horner is his enemy. And while we can't possibly know Zach Brown's true intentions, like I don't think of him as, you know, a fighter for women in the workplace. Like whatever his motivation is, he did say the right thing. And I think that should be rewarded in a way, but that's probably the wrong word. But like, we want people to have the correct take, and like that was the correct take regardless of the motivations behind it. This is not me deifying Zach Brown. I'm not saying like think of him as this great, amazing person, but he was correct in his statement at that time. And Horner saying, well, you find out who your friends are, don't you, is just so telling of the way that these men operate in the workplace and the fact that they expect all of these other men to just cover for them, and the culture of silence is pervasive in like every workplace and clearly in Formula One to prevent people from coming forward. And it shows you why the fact that oh, can you hear that siren? Whatever, I'm not redoing this, but the fact that he expected that and like that comment was just very telling to me, and it honestly fucking pissed me off. In terms of the coverage of the leak, I mean, tip of the cap for even covering it, honestly. I don't like the way Will Buxton was talking about it, but I will say the way that they stitched together all of the non-denials and him really being pressed about it, I think was very telling. And obviously I have a pre-existing bias here. You all know how I feel about this situation, but I do think he came across very guilty in that segment. Like, it certainly didn't exonerate him. And while I don't like having to watch him on my TV and him be central to this season of Drive to Survive, the fact of the matter is he was allowed to remain in his role, and F1 and the FIA basically said that this is none of our business. And for that reason, like, it makes sense for him to be in Drive to Survive. And I do think that either F1 or the FIA, probably the FIA, should have a harassment reporting system where this can be handled by a neutral party. It's workplace safety in the same way that stuff is for the drivers. Like, these people are also a part of the sport. Like, the car doesn't appear magically fully ready in the garage on Thursday night, you know what I mean? They need money to build it, they need the people to build it, they need the materials to build it, they need somebody to file their taxes, and those people are just as much a part of the team, and that's acknowledged when the driver is doing well. But when those people are being harassed in the workplace, then all of a sudden it has nothing to do with the sport. Again, I said I wasn't going to get too far into it, but you know how I feel. Final thought on the Horner thing. The Max quote they used after his dad spoke with the Daily Mail was a lot better than the one I remember him initially giving to all the Horner stuff. Like, the fact that he's like, my dad's not a liar and I want to be somewhere where everyone is happy to work, it kind of implied, I'm still disappointed with Max in general, because I feel like his position is different than Checo's in that he has a lot of power within the team and was clearly willing to exercise that on behalf of Marco. And to me, I'm just like, you knew this person. But that was interesting they included that quote. Finally, for this episode, on a much lighter note, every time they say papaya, I cannot help but think of this clip.
Kind of blood orange.
This is actually a gorgeous color.
Blood orange, she's so pretentious. Shut up, it's red. Blood orange.
Okay, we're on to episode 2, and my first thought was I liked the vlogging style that they all did. It was very fun. I will say, I wish they included Max. He probably was not willing to do it, and that's why they didn't. But if they're framing it around this whole generation, I feel like he, despite joining Formula One much earlier, is very much a part of that in terms of like he competed against them growing up and stuff. Max, this is where we start to get into the Max v Lando stuff. I wrote, Max low-key does have a fuck you mentality. Like, he got a little bit of the bad boy edit, but I just don't think, at least to me, maybe it's because I think that you have to have a little bit of that attitude to be a world champion. Like, if you look at the ones that have come before, it's true of them, it's true of Max. And if I was Lando, I don't know if I would love the characterization. Will Buxton being like, even if it means beating his best friend, like, is it that serious? And the Max and Lando, they are friends. Like, I don't discount that, but I feel like they're just trying to push the narrative a little too much. And I don't hate narrative building, and I understand the fact that we're all consuming so much content. It's like these things get old and stale for us really quickly, but I just think that it's a little bit heavy-handed is all I'm saying. I also made another video about this, but the Zac Brown foot shot, what was that? Unacceptable. We need a content warning. It should have been censored. Absolutely. My eyes did not need to see Zac Brown's toes. They really did. The lingering foot shot was absolutely crazy. In terms of Lando no-wins, I made a video about this at the time and people disagree. Listen, I'm a Lando hater. I have been branded as such, but I've always said, like, the no-wins thing is fair play. And I hate the argument when people are like, oh, but you're like showing that you care. And I'm like, that's the last gasp argument of someone who has been defeated in an internet back and forth. Like, I loved the no-wins thing, but listen, so when he won, he gets to be like, I overcame that, and I loved the sweatshirt. I thought it was cunty. I thought it was a fun little tip of the cap, and people are like, oh, you're just showing that you're bothered. And I'm like, as a perpetually bothered person myself, fair play. Like, he cares about people thinking that he's good. Like, that's true of every single Formula One driver. Like, they all want to be a legend. I thought that was fair play. Also, Jensen saying worst nickname ever. I was like, damn, okay. The George Russell Trump clip, that whole thing was absolutely wild. Like, the podcast clip that came out. I mean, major side eye from myself. I will say, the clip that they show in Drive to Survive it felt like his tone was a little bit sarcastic, but it didn't really make sense to be sarcastic in the situation that they clipped it into, but it also was cut very close on either side. I feel like there's context that we're missing, but at the same time, I don't know if George Russell's getting the benefit of the doubt from me. The little Lando party boy segment to me, I mean, it was fine, I had nothing against it, but I'm just like, I feel like they're all party boys, you know what I mean? Like, is Lando really going out and doing this stuff more than the others? I mean, those videos did come out, so like, to be fair, like they covered them. It was fun. I think it made Lando more relate. I thought it was a good like character development thing for him. But I was like, I feel like they all party. I was impressed that they included the safety car element in Miami, because oftentimes Drive to Survive, a big criticism people had is that they simplify a lot of the racing elements in order to make it more digestible for a non-F1 audience. They definitely did that with Brazil. I mean, we'll get to it when we get to it, but I kind of understand that in a way, because I think Drive to Survive is a great introductory tool, because it is very disconcerting when you're kind of just dropped into the middle of a sport. You have no idea who any of these people are, what they're doing, why you should care, why they care about certain things. So it's nice to get a little bit of handle on the overarching plot lines. Now, I do feel like there are times where Drive to Survive creeps into the territory of being inaccurate, and that's not really justifiable because of all of those previous reasons I just talked about, and I do think they need to be careful about that. I also think that there are very obvious visual continuity errors, and I know that this is very common in reality TV for them to reshoot or to insert stuff from other times that they were filming, but the problem is with Formula One, there are a lot of visual things where you can tell, if you know what you're looking for, that this is not from the right time frame. And the reason they will reshoot, they'll have them all get dressed up in the same outfits. They won't let them have arguments with a drink in their hand, because you want to maintain that visual continuity, and I do feel like they fell down on that a little bit this year. But overall, I felt like the coverage of Miami was good. Them pushing the #1 driver thing is just like, it's so annoying to me, because like Oscar was still in contention for it, and I do get it, but Miami, like we're literally in Miami, we're a third of the way through the season. Like this shouldn't be a thing yet. I'm so sorry. Overall though, I don't think Max came across looking bad. Like he just seems very matter of fact. He's like, I'm here to win. What happens on track isn't personal, and I feel like that is a very fair take, and how Max has always presented himself. And he can be a little bit of a hypocrite at times, but they're literally all hypocrites. Like just, they're having emotional reactions to things, and I don't think either him or Lando really came across that bad in terms of the coverage of their little back and forth with each other. Lando received a generous edit. Like if Max had gotten on the mic after Miami and been like, Lando Norris just got lucky, it wasn't talent because of the safety car, I feel like that may have been included when the reverse that happened in Brazil was not included. But I feel like I also want to give Lando Norris a little bit of credit. I meant that with some time and perspective, the interviews that he gave to Drive to Survive were much more like reasonable, and I don't think he came across that. Lando did get a little bit sassy in terms of being asked about the World Championship, or they showed a press clip, and on one hand, I do get it. Like, you're being asked the same question over and over and over again, but also this is these people's job, like, and there was the championship fight they were trying to sell, right? And I also get it, but he was like, I'm coming for it. I'm going for the championship. So then to be asked about it, it's a little bit silly to get mad, but also I understand just being frustrated the millionth time you were asked the question. All right, we're on to the next page. Oh. My last note for episode 2 is Andrea Stella did tell me to walk into traffic. Oh, sorry, I left y'all. Sorry. My last note for episode 2 is Andrea Stella could tell me to walk into traffic, and I do. All right, on to episode 3. Toto Wolff is me when I get dumped, I fear. Like, it's just, I get why the Lewis fans are annoyed at Toto, but I can't even really get mad at him, because it's so clearly a cope to me that I'm like, all right, girl, like, you do you. I loved the Susie appearance. The view from their apartment, stunning, beautiful. Toto Wolff was eating cottage cheese. I don't know 100% that it was cottage cheese. That's what it looked like to me, but the plastic fork is crazy. You're a billionaire. You're telling me that you don't have regular silverware? Absolutely unacceptable. My next note is just, Carmen is so pretty, George is talking. I clearly was not paying attention to what he had to say. And then my next one is Lewis. Oh, Silverstone, so iconic of him. I loved reliving it, you know what I mean, in any capacity. I wish there was more focus on Lewis's victory at Silverstone, because it was iconic. Will Buxton not a fan of George Russell. He was shading him so hard. I was like, ah. Also, I do hate to give Christian Horner credit because as we have established, I fucking hate him. But him saying if Toto wants a Verstappen, Yas is available was pretty funny, I must say. The Toto Wolff, George Russell freediving scene. First of all, Toto Wolff did do an interview where he was like, I burst my eardrum on the first like acclamation drive, and it was so embarrassing because Netflix did this whole thing. They had them both out there. I wish they had shown that because it would have been funny. Them having this random performance review on a rubber boat was genuinely hilarious to me, and people are like, oh, it's so fake. And I'm like, yes, obviously it's fake, but the fact that they chose to do this and then go play mermaids, hilarious. Why was Toto Wolff straddling that boat also? But it was a very like manufactured story, like, ooh, do we believe in George to be the leader? And they were obviously like always gonna be like, yes, and then like we're gonna bring in Kimmy. But if I were George Russell, I would be like, that's the storyline you chose to go with. Like, come on, you could have had instant faith in me. But I do think that they were just kind of playing it up for drama, if I'm being honest. Kimmy Antonelli, I love the scene. His room was so cute. The Lego cars. This is child labor. And also when they left the camera at the height that it was for Toto and or George, I don't know who went before him, but it was like, cut him off like here. I was like, that's mean. We're calling him short, and I don't think that that's very fair. And also, you are bullying the child. The whole scene was very sweet. Toto being like, you're gonna be a Formula One driver, but I was kind of laughing to myself because you have to know that they're gonna give you the seat when they set up this whole filming situation, because imagine if they did all of this, like went to his house, had this whole thing on camera just to reject him. Like, that would actually be crazy. We're on to episode 4, which was called Carlos Signs, but S-I-G-N-S, like signs his contract, which I thought was very clever. Will Buxton saying Carlos played a pivotal role in turning Ferrari back into a race-winning outfit. Did he? Because, well, yes, Ferrari has made improvements since 2020. It would be difficult for them to have gone backwards, to be honest with you, although never underestimate what Ferrari is capable of. He also, everything that went down in 2022 into 2023 re-development with him and Mattia Binotto really took the team in a large step backwards, but I suppose that overall they have moved forward, so fine. But like giving Carlos Sainz a nod on the development side, knowing the Sainz Tandera of it all, I don't want to get too into it. This is supposed to be a nice lighthearted Drive to Survive video. I'm putting my tinfoil hat, keeping it in the drawer, but just know that I was thinking it. The trio of Carlos is menacing. The rom-com main character as edit that they gave James Vowles was cracking me up the entire time. That music, him going for the run, then like fixing his little hair. I was cracking up. I mean, listen, it wouldn't be Drive to Survive without a few good running montages, but the music choice for him compared to Flavio, whoever was doing the score on this season of Drive to Survive was absolutely great at their job. It cracked me up. And you know what? I love James Vowles. The Logan stuff, I felt for Logan. I really did. Again, same thing with the Carlos thing. Like, even though I was objectively like, I get it, I get the decision, watching someone go through that is I'm never like, like, I'm not actually evil. The Sauber team principal, Lake Como establishing shots, his office, his like leather notebook, the pen, the boat, the beautiful Lake Como ate up Oxfordshire and Monaco in like one scene, and those other two places had a million like beautiful establishing shots. That man, damn, he's not gonna be the team principal of Sauber next year. Actually, Jonathan Wheatley is taking over in April because that's when his gardening leave from Red Bull ends. But the whole time my jaw was on the floor. Jack calling Carlos the paddock slut was very funny. We're still doing this extended dating metaphor for Carlos and James Vowles. It ends in a hotel room. They're definitely leaning into it. I'm curious as to how real how close he was to signing with Williams initially, and then like how real the delay for like maybe signing with Alpine was, or if that's something that was played up for the show. Either way, it was an interesting storyline. Also, the Flavio entrance, the music is so funny. Horner saying Flavio will fuck him and he's expensive, which Flavio will hate, about Carlos was very interesting. Like all of the other team principals talking about him. It was just, and he comes across as evil, but like also like Flavio Briatore. Evil is like line 1A of the bio, so I don't think that that's necessarily like a bad thing for him. And him being like, everyone makes mistakes when talking about Carlos signing with Williams was pretty funny. And you know what? We'll see, because I feel like both of them have showed a little bit of promise, a little bit of improvement, but it takes a lot to get off the bottom like that. So it's truly a wait and see situation in terms of if Carlos made the quote unquote right decision. That being said, if the question is who do I trust more, James Valls or Flavio, the answer to that is not difficult for me to come up with. Let's just say that. Episode 5, Le Curse of Leclerc. I loved this one. The lady doing a double take at Charles in the bodega. You are me, I am you, just know that I love you. The parallel park job that they showed Charles doing, absolutely hilarious. I do feel bad that Charles hates the curse. However, I will say it got to a point where it's like, when you're watching, to not comment on it would be a little bit crazy given the circumstances that have unfolded. And I hate it because I feel like Charles really blames himself for everything and is such a team player and has really like internalized that Ferrari mentality, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but in this particular situation with Drive to Survive talking about what's gone down in Monaco, like they totally made it seem like he was just crashing every year. Like, and the one crash that they did show from 2019, they completely failed to mention that he literally qualified in P15 because he wanted to go back out for a second lap in Q2, or no, it wasn't I think it was P16. He wanted to go out for I don't remember if it was Q1 or Q2, but he wanted to go out for another lap, and Ferrari was like, no, you're good, you're safe, and turns out he was not safe, and he got eliminated, and he said, fuck it, I am ending up on the podium or in the harbor, and he was always gonna end up in the harbor, but he did pass 3 people before he crashed into the wall. It was iconic, and he was throwing a temper tantrum, and it was very brat, very diva of him, okay? And the crash in 2021, as we have established, listen, obviously it's not great that he crashed in quali, but Checo the next year did the same thing and fucking won because his previous lap was good enough and he didn't destroy his gearbox. It was the left drive shaft, which Mattia Binotto got on Sky Sports and said, oh yeah, we totally could have replaced that without a penalty. We just didn't check it because it wasn't on the side of the car that hit the wall, as if the shock from hitting the wall does not reverberate through the entire, like, why would you not check it? Why would you not check it? And so that really wasn't his fault. Like, any competent team, he would have been starting that race on pole and would have won. And all of the other shit that's gone down in Monaco, like, we're not even going to get into like the strategy of it all in 2022, and like the fact that he was driving in the Monaco Historique Grand Prix in Niki Lauda's Ferrari, and the brake, something about the brakes, like, literally broke. You can see the piece fly off the car, and everybody reported, like, oh, Charles Leclerc bins it in a vintage Ferrari. Nobody reported that his brakes just, like, he went to, like, when you're coming out of the tunnel and you're going around the swimming pool chicane, like, he went to brake, and the car simply did not brake. You can see the piece fly, and only Autosport corrected themselves, but they still published a demonstratively false article, and it genuinely pisses me off that it was covered in that manner, and that's what makes it. If Charles Leclerc was just binning it in Monaco every year, it wouldn't be a curse. He would just be shit at street tracks. Charles Leclerc, like, the fact that it was all of these outside forces and it was like different things every time, I do think there was a witch out there, and he managed to overcome it, which the coolest thing you can do in sports is overcome a curse, and that's why that Monaco victory was so iconic and will be so iconic. Like, I think of it, I remember the Yankees beating the Red Sox beating the Yankees in the 2004 ALCS and breaking the curse of the Bambino and winning the World Championship. Like, that's one of the most iconic things that's ever happened in sports. So I'm sorry to Charles for talking about the curse, but I fucking hated the way Drive to Survive covered it. Reading from the rest of my notes, I have baby Charles, what a cutie pie. Horner saying Charles makes a lot of mistakes. Fuck you. The wood floors in Charles's apartment, stunning, like that herringbone wood. Oh, Jensen is back in his snazzy blazer. That's all. His blazer was pretty snazzy. And that's all I have for that episode. I loved watching Charles win Monaco again. I think there should have been more Charles coverage in this season of Drive to Survive. Also, no Seb. That's my criticism. You're gonna say there was no Seb in Formula One, and I say that's no excuse. Get him in there somehow. I don't care how. There should just be a Seb corner. And that's my honest opinion. Next up, we have episode 6, Wheels of Fortune. Will Buxton and everybody saying McLaren had the fastest car through the end of the season, so just jot that down. This is Andrea Erasure, as I've already discussed. The coverage of Hungary also pissed me off because Will Buxton, you know better, and he said something that's demonstratively untrue, which is that McLaren did something that they didn't need to do. They pitted their drivers out of order. And what he means by that is the lead driver gets preference. Those are the rules agreed to within usually every single team, unless one person is in contention for a championship and the other person isn't. So the person that is ahead gets the preferential pit strategy. And McLaren actually did need to pit Lando Norris. There was a reason, and it was because his ass was about to get got by Lewis Hamilton in a far slower Mercedes, by the way, and they needed to pit him first to save him from getting his ass got by Lewis. And so because they bailed him out, they expected him to swap back with Oscar because they screwed Oscar in order to help Lando out. And missing that context paints this whole scenario in a far more flattering light. I also thought it was super interesting that he admitted that he wasn't going to do it, because I feel like that is what I assumed. And I'll say the same thing that I've always said about this situation, which is he kind of picked the worst of both worlds. There are two fine options. One I think is better than the other. I think the best option is to let him back by and then pass him fair and square. Then there's kind of a middle option. This is like the 0.5 of the 2.5 options maybe, in that you could have let him by in maybe a cheeky place where it's easier to repass and be like, ooh, I let him by. Or you hold to your guns and you're like, I don't give a fuck, I'm winning the championship. But you have to, if you're gonna stand on it, you have to stand on it. To do that for 20 laps just to concede at the end, it's just the worst thing you could possibly do, because I'm like, you could have spent those 20 laps trying to pass Oscar. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't need to do the whole thing if you were just gonna let him by. I do think that it would have been a little bit premature to throw the gauntlet down like that, but I would have backed Lando if he didn't let Oscar back by, because sometimes I think that you need to be selfish to win a championship. Now, again, the context that the only reason he was in that position is because McLaren bailed his ass out against Lewis, not fantastic, but I don't think it would have been the worst thing in the world to do either of those things. To start, the fact that he said, if I had expected Oscar to pass me, or if I had been expecting that move, like Oscar never would have passed me, and I'm like, the fact that you weren't expecting someone to make a lunge into turn one is crazy town behavior, when the interviews with everybody on the team and from Lando made it pretty clear that there was no team orders in place. Like, yes, maybe Lando can think that that move was over the line in terms of what you should be doing against your teammate, but at no point was Oscar like, okay, like, I'm not gonna pass you, I pinky swear. So to not expect, I feel like you should always expect a lunge into turn one. Like, people are always gonna fight you on the start. I feel like that's kind of a crazy sentiment, and also it just brings more attention to the situation. And I'm being a little bit harsh on Lando. I think overall, throughout this episode, he handled himself well, and the way he discussed it was overall fine. I also did laugh because when he and Max were in his apartment talking about it, they're like joking about hanging around in button downs. So that did bring a moment of levity that humanized him a little bit. Lando saying that he expects McLarens to do things differently, and I'm like, so randomly screw Oscar because you can't stay ahead of Lewis or go against the lead driver. Like, is he saying that he thinks he should always get the preferential pit strategy despite who's ahead? Like, because that to me was the implication, which was very interesting. And then Will Buxton again says something that I think is just factually wrong, which is like the two number one driver thing never works. And he references, like, obviously Michael Schumacher's time at Ferrari and the Red Bull situation. And I'm kind of like, agree to disagree. I think championships have been won both ways. The Mercedes situation with Lewis and Nico, 2010 in Red Bull, I always bring this up, but if they had favored Mark Webber in post-Korea like he wanted them to, Fernando Alonso would have won that championship. Like, they had two drivers in it, and they were like, may the best man win, and that's why they ended up winning in the end. Like, if they had swapped Seb and Mark like they wanted them to in Brazil, like the freaking commentary Mara Brundle would not shut the fuck up about, Fernando Alonso would have won the world championship that year, and Red Bull would be shit out of luck. So there is situations, and I also always bring up the Valtteri situation in 2021. Like, if Lewis had had a more competitive teammate that was anywhere close to where he was supposed to be, Max would not have been able to pit like that and gain the advantage that he had toward the end. And now obviously that whole thing was bullshit, but I'm just saying, like, there's something to be gained from having two drivers in the mix for the team and also for the lead driver. And most of the situations where the 1 and 2 driver thing works out, it's because the number 2 driver isn't prescribed to that role. They're just not as good as the number 1 driver. Like, it sorts itself out naturally. When the team starts trying to like play with that artificially, I feel like it's almost always more trouble than it's worth. Max saying everything shit about the car was very funny. And then I was just watching Baku, like, I guess it was so long ago that like I just kind of forget what happened, and then when it happens I obviously remember, but the way I was acting surprised as if I have not already watched that race multiple times. But Oscar winning Baku was so cunty of him. Alright, we're on to episode 7, In the Heat of the Night. Okay, this was actually the vlogging episode. I don't know why I said that before, maybe just because they did frame the beginning of that around them, so I got confused, but I stand by my take that they should have included Max, even though I know that realistically he probably was just like, I'm absolutely not doing that. George's vlogging was sending me. He has the longest arms in the world, but for some reason the camera was like this far from his face. But I loved this episode overall because I think it gave us a really interesting and unique insight into kind of the dynamics of that generation. Like the fact that Alex and George were traveling together and vlogging each other. We got some cute scenes. We also got some cute scenes of Pierre and Charles. The fact that Pierre is always late and Charles is like, I'm literally starting this meal without you. I don't give a fuck. Lando traveling with Max, and the fact that we know that Lando and Daniel travel with Max. There was a lot of interesting behind the scenes tidbits to be picked up on. They were all terrible cameramen though. I also must say George Russell wearing flip-flops to the confessional, criminal. Charles requesting a piano to his room, absolutely iconic. Okay, diva. George saying Charles is the hottest took me out as well. I already talked about the Pierre being late storyline. George bringing his own pillow and duvet is the most on-brand thing of all time. Honestly, it's these little tidbits that I watch Drive to Survive for, because like, I know what happened during the year. I've already formed my opinion, but you do get some very interesting and cute, like, behind the scenes, but like, of course George Russell travels with his own pillow and duvet. I feel like I've always known that, but it's just nice to have it confirmed. And like Charles being grossed out by the kebab and being like, it's literally breakfast, and Alex being like, it's actually 3 p.m. I think that this is what Drive to Survive is good at, which is like humanizing these people and making them feel a little bit more real and giving them a chance to kind of express their personality outside of such a rigid, structured environment that is the post-race media, where you're talking about what is often this very intense thing that just happened. You're having like the worst day of your life or the best day of your life. So I like it in that sense. George being by far the most diligent vlogger was also very on brand, calling Valtteri a Finnish porn star. I feel like George maybe made a bet with someone about how many times he could say porn star in Drive to Survive this year, because it came up a couple times. But was Singapore the cold tire thing also with Ferrari? I meant to check that before I made this video, but I obviously forgot because we're discovering these notes together right now. Final thought is I also really loved Alex's segment where he kind of opened up about, you know, watching the others fight at the front and what that feels like, and I thought it was just very genuine and vulnerable of him, and it made me like Alex a lot. I mean, I already love Alex, so it didn't really change my opinion, but I thought that that was really cool of him to talk about that. Episode 8, Elbows Out. Horner saying this episode that a reality TV confessional is what he imagines therapy would be like. Girl, I need you to be so fucking for real with me right now. I mean, it's probably for the best that Christian Horner not attend therapy, because he very much does give me the energy of someone who therapy would just make him worse. It would just increase his evil powers. So you just keep doing what you're doing, my guy. They did interestingly show the Red Bull kind of rally that they had of all of their former drivers at Goodwood. And they didn't address it in Drive to Survive, but I remain interested to this day that Seb didn't go, which I found very strange, because the past 2 years he went to Goodwood, and we know Seb loves a show run. He did that whole Red Bull event in Germany at the Nürburgring with his old cars. So I'm like, what's the story there? And it's totally possible that it could just be a scheduling conflict, like maybe one of his kids had something, you know, he's a busy guy. But the fact that he wasn't there, like, Was he unwilling to rally around a creep? I would like to think so. There's a part of me that's like, that's probably unlikely, but it's also possible that Britta was like, hey, like, maybe this isn't the best look ever, which is smart. It's not. Liam hating golf and being like, I simply do not have the patience for this. Extremely iconic. I'm right there with you, bestie. The Daniel scenes were so cute, and the whole arc was literally tearing my heart out because obviously I knew what was about to happen. And I skipped through a lot of this episode, I can't lie, okay, because it was actually so sad. And, like, literally one of my notes that I have in here is just, this is so sad, man. And Netflix showing Margot talking shit about their Danny Rick storyline, which was, by the way, there was like clearly from a separate race than they were trying to portray that it was at, but regardless, I mean, it's Helmut Marko, that he's gonna talk shit. It's literally his entire function. I felt very vindicated in one element of this episode though, which is Horner basically said that the reason that Checo hung on for so long despite the obvious struggles that were going on is because they really didn't have a replacement. I was like, guys, this is literally Red Bull. They're so harsh when it comes to mid-season driver swaps. If they felt sure about any of the potential options, like, they would have already been in that seat. So I feel like I was validated in my take on that one. But I did feel a little bit for Liam in these vague directives and being like, it's looking promising, and like they are kind of stringing all of them along. Yuki, first of all, I loved the gold flake shot, but I feel for Yuki. I wish Yuki got a shot. I really do. And I kind of get the argument. People are like, well, what has he done to like earn that? Or I just don't think that any of them have particularly. I think that they've all had their moments, but I don't think any of them are far and away the definitive choice. All right, episode 9, under new management. We start this one off with Haas and Ayo Komatsu, who's their new team principal, and I loved him. I honestly think he came across so great. I will say they spliced together the initial quote for him that they lead with, because he's like, I'm not interested in replacing Gunter, like I don't want to be last. But when they show the full clip of him talking about him and Gunter, it's actually very sweet. And he's like, I'm gonna miss him. We've worked together for so long. So I feel like we might have been having a little bit of fun with sound bites on that one. And they kind of bring Flavio in. They're having a diva off with the two of them. And this guy, Ayo, comes across very nice and genuine and like a normal person, which to be fair, next to Flavio isn't hard, but I feel like he would have come across like that anyway. I really liked him. I feel like I might have to be, and with Ollie going to Haas this year, I'm going to be watching anyway, so maybe I might become a stan. He could be evil though. Like Formula One team principals, I got my eye on you because most of them end up being pretty evil, but from what I saw of him on Drive to Survive, he seemed like a cool guy. Also, Horner calling him a vanilla engineer, like, so he's not texting his assistant about their underwear, because that to me is a good thing. I know that you don't feel that way, Christian Horner, but like, but also the scene of Flavio where he's driving in the English countryside and he's talking to his wife, and I assume it's his wife, and he's like, this is why the English are miserable, and it just shows like the bleak, rainy countryside. And also he said, and Romans are happy. Like, is him calling Italians like, what was that about? I've never heard that before, but maybe it's a thing that I would know. Obviously, I'm not from Italy. But then the sequence of events of the call dropping, because there's terrible fucking service around Silverstone and in the nation of England more broadly, I will say. Not that I've been everywhere, but the fact that there's not great service in London is crazy. But then the fact that he's like, oh, this stupid phone, it's the most, I don't want to say old, he's not old. He's, you know, he looks very young, he's sprightly, but that is something that my parents would do, I'm just saying. The star of this episode, however, was Esteban's cat. Adorable, so cute. I think Esteban came across really well. It is interesting that in Drive to Survive, the way they talk about it, it was his choice to go to Haas, which is very funny and makes Flavio's reaction even funnier, because it's the same thing with like the Toto Lewis dynamic. I'm like, okay, you're clearly just bitter here. Like, you're trying to paint it into this whole thing. He's like, we need someone who's 100%. I'm like, you're just pissed and you're punishing him for not doing what you wanted, in my personal opinion. But during the season, I feel like the media coverage of it painted it kind of like Esteban got fired. And I feel like neither of the sources, I would be interested to see what people think is like the true narrative of it all. Perhaps it was a mutual decision, but also I wish Esteban nothing but the best. I've always been like neutral, positive toward Esteban. Also, I won't lie, like the cat content won me over. If you have a cat in your Drive to Survive scene, I'm gonna walk away from that scene probably. It helps you out in terms of like my meter of where kind of, you know, when it would be interesting when people watch like the State of the Union or presidential debates and they have those like dial trackers where they get a bunch of people and they're like, what is your opinion of this person, like as live as they're speaking, and you can see it go up and down. That for Drive to Survive would be interesting, but the discourse, whoever was doing it would get in trouble almost instantly probably. I wouldn't want to be the one with the dial. Ollie, my Shayla, I was glad they included him. It was not maybe the moment that Ollie Bearman would have liked included in it, but you know what? We'll see how it goes next year. I have total faith in him. It was a rough one, but I still think he comes across like reasonably well. Something that really bothered me about this episode is they kind of skate around the whole Pierre Esteban thing. It's never really addressed, although it's referenced a couple of times, and I feel like this is a real missed opportunity to dive into that and like their podium and to have both of them talk about it, because neither of them ever had, but it was clearly such an issue to the extent where one of them had to leave the team, or at least that's what was implied throughout the course of this season. So I would have liked to see that angle be addressed, but I also do get it if this is something like very personal to them, maybe they didn't want to, but as a viewer, I'm like, we still never really, like, again, they kind of like allude to it a little bit. I'm like, I really wish that they dug in on that. Episode 10, Endgame, the Sphere photo shoot, iconic. Exactly the kind of content I'm looking for from Drive to Survive. Same thing with the weird color block podium photo shoot at the beginning. It was very funny. Will Buxton saying that this was the wildest season in F1 history. Have you watched any other seasons of Formula One besides like literally last year? Moving on to Brazil in terms of the actual race itself, I get the criticism of the coverage. They totally skipped over the whole it wasn't a false start, but the situation at the start where Lando Norris ran the flags or the lights, and they also skipped over Lando Norris getting got at the start like he did like the fact that that narrative wasn't included in Drive to Survive at all, like he just cannot keep a lap one lead to save his life, is very telling. But at the end of the day, while I do think Lando Norris got a generous edit writ large, their coverage of Brazil was fine. I think they did a good job of simplifying it, but still hitting a lot of the major points and giving Max credit for what was indisputably a generational drive, right? And I also get that they want it to be an easy story to digest in however long this episode is going to be, and they maybe don't have time to get into all the intricacies and the details, because I understand that as someone who consumes like every single piece of F1 content, that Drive to Survive isn't necessarily for me. Like, I can enjoy it, but this is sort of an advertisement for the F1 season. Couple final thoughts on episode 10. Never thought that I would be the one saying this, but I do feel like this season of Drive to Survive could have benefited from some Mark Webber. Like, a Mark Webber confessional would have been fantastic, particularly it was so centered around McLaren. Obviously he's Oscar's manager. Jensen was in it, come on. Like, I feel like it would have been great. And then Zach with the Simply Lovely at the end, I was kind of like, Max kicked your ass. You know what I mean? Like, yes, obviously McLaren beat Red Bull, but if you know even top line what went down this season, like Max pulled it out of the fucking bag with a much worse car to win the Drivers' Championship, and Simply Lovely is Max's thing, not Red Bull's thing. Like, Zach is more than entitled to be, you know, stunting on Red Bull if he wants to, but Max won. It's not his fault that his teammate, you know, and that the car sucked and like that Checo wasn't getting a lot of points. Like, I feel like the Simply Lovely, it just didn't really hit for me, but that's my opinion. And so we are at the end of my Drive to Survive notes. This was kind of random and all over the place and literally just based on what I wrote down, because I watched it once and then I had a very busy weekend with some family stuff, so I didn't go back and clip it or anything. So I'm sorry if this makes absolutely no sense, but these are just my unfiltered first reaction. Because overall, I really do think that, well, Drive to Survive is important in shaping the narrative, like every piece of F1 coverage is important in shaping the narrative. And the narrative in F1 is important even more so than it is in other sports because we lack, other than number of wins and number of championships, we lack a lot of hard data on and metrics on the drivers, if that makes sense. So the narrative is incredibly important. But that being said, I feel like Drive to Survive you'll have a lot more fun and you'll enjoy it a lot more if you just accept that it's a fun, silly, dramatized, simplified version of the Formula One season. That being said, put me in charge. Put me in coach. Like, I feel like if I was the producer of the storylines, they're missing out on some decent drama by, like, the Pierre and Esteban thing, for example. Like, if they just knew a little bit more, like, than the top layer of the drama, quote unquote, that's going on, I feel like it could be so much better. But either way, it's fun. I enjoyed watching and I can't wait for this season. I'm so stressed. I'm so anxious. I'm about to film a season preview right after this, so you'll get to watch me melt down about that tomorrow because I think I'm gonna try to start posting YouTube videos every day. I know I'm gonna fail at this, but if I set my objective at that and then fail, I'll still be posting more than I am, just doing it sporadically whenever I feel like it. I feel like I need the push of that goal. So yeah, stay tuned.